I will not let my daughters come home to me being beaten to death. He would back off for a moment and then come right back in to, again, he's this close to my face. And his face is twisted. Until you've been in front of a man whose face is twisted in rage because he wants to decimate you, you don't know what that feels like. The fear, the almost surrender that this is how it ends. This is where we go. This is how I die. My daughter thought for sure that my husband was getting the gun to kill me and then himself. She was prepared for a murder-suicide because of his rage was out of control. I had even in previous times had conversations with my husband because he kept a loaded handgun by his bedside that I said, I know you're gonna shoot and kill me one day. I said, you're probably not gonna do it as an intentional motivation, but you're gonna get that gun to put me back in my place, and your rage is gonna overtake you and you're gonna shoot and kill me. I said, I've already accepted that that's probably how I'm going to die. I said, please don't do that in front of our daughters.
What's up, beautiful people? It's your favorite light, MB. Welcome to another episode of the Confidence Way podcast, where we are shining light on the darkness that is domestic violence and abuse. You've been here before, and if you ain't, guess what? We got 3 goals: to educate, empower, and encourage. We are here to educate anyone who has never been in an abusive relationship, doesn't understand abusive relationships, or perhaps you have been in an abusive relationship and you didn't even know it. We are here to empower all of our survivors to stand up and share your story. You are valuable, you are powerful, and your voice deserves to be heard. And we are here to encourage anyone who is currently suffering in silence. Listen, you are not alone. You are not crazy. Abuse is not normal. Your feelings are valid. And despite how it may look and feel in this very moment, there's always a way out, but you need to seek support. Now let's go and hop up in this thing, because y'all know it's time to rise above these insecurities, release the burdens of shame and guilt, and revive our God-given power, purpose, and passion, the confidence way. So we about to light it up. Y'all, welcome to another episode. We have the beautiful, amazing, strong, impactful, empowering, powerful Michele in the building.
Hey, thank you. That's probably the best lead-in I've ever had. Thank you. I'm gonna own that. I'm gonna wear that. I might write it on my wall.
And you should print it on a shirt.
Yeah, absolutely. People are gonna know I'm in the house when I come in.
That part right there. Oh my gosh. First of all, Michele, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come grace us with your presence and to just be here with us and, let us in on your life, sharing your story so that we can help others who have either experienced it or who know somebody who's experienced it. We just really appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I'm very honored.
You ready?
I am.
Let's get in this thing. So my very first question for you is, how many abusive relationships have you been in?
Ooh, that's a good question. I had been with my husband since I was 15 years old. So we were together for just over 40 years. And he was basically one of the first guys I ever had been with. I had dated a couple of little boys, in our teens, but nothing really. And my husband, when we started dating, I was 15, he was 19. So that is a concernable age difference at that time. And yeah, so he's been my only person that I've been involved in a relationship, like an intimate relationship. However, my father had a brutal temper as well. And there were times where I was the recipient of that. So growing up, I had some unpleasant childhood memories of anger. I know that at one point I started having lots of hand and foot pains and went to see a podiatrist. And pardon me, I probably have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, where you're like hyper flexible, that sort of thing. But I had a lot of foot pains when I was younger, and they did some x-rays and found that I had some scars of previous bone breakage. Yeah. And I was asked about that as a I was probably 10 or 12 when they discovered the breaks via x-ray to see, what was going on with my hands and feet. And I knew, though, you don't say anything about anger. And so I just was like, oh, I fall down sometimes. But sometimes I was thrown into walls. Sometimes I was kicked down the stairs. So I remember one time I tried running. My dad was very angry at me, and I tried running out the front door of our house. And we had it was a glass like door, and we had one of those latches that you hook in. And I didn't know it was hooked, and I ran through the plate glass trying to escape that. So I've been abused in different ways, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. So
Yeah.
before we even get to homeboy,
Mhm.
sit right here for a second.
Mhm.
Do you remember, because you just said that you went to the doctor and when they did the x-rays, they saw the signs of the healed breaks. Do you
Mhm.
actually remember when your hands and or feet or your feet experienced that and they were broken?
I do recall the instances, not necessarily like specific instances, but I do know that after some of the blow-ups, I would be hurt. And, but I didn't say anything because once the anger was over, it was like we all just wanted that behind us. So I don't think I ever mentioned that I had lingering pains in my wrists or in my ankles.
Not even to your mom?
Mm-mm, no.
How do you, as a child, a young child, walk around with broken feet and you don't tell anybody?
I think it's just resilience. You just learn to be resilient. And, like I do remember there were a couple of times where there was an instance where my father's temper exploded. And afterwards, I remember we were visiting family in upstate New York. Something had happened with my cousins, and I went to Tattletale, and it led to me getting kicked and thrown around a room. And afterwards, because my dad apparently had wanted time alone, and so he had said, I'm gonna go outside, take a walk, or whatever. I wasn't supposed to interrupt that time, and I did because my cousin threw a Barbie and it hit me in the eye. And after the whole thing had happened, and of course, at this point now, because we were visiting other family, it was a somewhat exposed occurrence of violence. And later that day, my cousins had a playhouse down in the woods behind their home. And later that day, somebody had called down, hey, we're going to go someplace. Do you want to go? And I said, is dad going? And they were like, yes. And I said, no, I don't want to go if he's going. And then I got shamed, um, that I shouldn't have said that because I hurt dad's feelings. And so I just learned to be quiet. You just learn to be quiet.
Who shamed you?
My sister,
How old is she older than you?
she's almost 10 years older than me.
Did she experience abuse?
I have no idea. It has never been talked about. Yeah. So I don't know.
What about your mom? Did you ever witness your mom being abused?
Yes. Yes, I did. And I love my mom with my whole heart. Um, so there've always been this overlying or overhanging cloud over me that was like, if you bring up anything abusive, she's going to end up getting abused. So I just kept my mouth shut. Um, I couldn't bear it. There were times when my dad's anger acted out against my mom, and it was notable. Like, either we were present or afterwards, mom had been crying or what have you. And I probably learned how to hide that abuse because my mom had learned how to hide that abuse. She was raised very poor, upstate New York. My grandfather was an alcoholic, and there was a lot of extreme abuse in her childhood. I know that sometimes he would threaten to take her to a children's home, and she thought that would be the best thing ever if she got to go live in a children's home, because at least she'd have food and clothes and shelter and safety, and she didn't have any of that. So I'm pretty sure I learned how to model silent endurance from my mom. And my mom was 17 when she met my dad, and they married within, I think, within the year they got married. So, she was still a child when she got married. But, and at some point, I know she was even put into foster care. Um, but at that time around, foster care wasn't a nurturing environment. She was basically farmed out to other families, kind of like hired help. Um, and so she worked 7 days a week for other families. Yeah,
That's bananas.
it is. It is. It's so heartbreaking. And I feel like as women, we tend to carry our hurts with us quietly. You just kind of push them to the side. you know Maybe you carry them around in your purse, so to speak. um, but you don't really get the chance to address what's done to you. Instead, you just ingest it as one more way that you have lost value.
Wow.
Yeah,
Ooh, that's a heavy statement.
it is.
At some point, somebody in our family has to stop this. We have to break the curse. We have to break the generational cycle. But we don't,
That's where I feel like I am. I'm
yeah,
like, I'm gonna speak up. I mean, my motto is that I will heal loudly so others will not die in silence. I'm like, I didn't come up with that motto, but it is my motto. And I'm gonna speak my piece so that others can start to, you spend a lot of time in abusive relationships wondering, is this abuse? And then so you talk yourself out of it a lot. And interspersed with the bad are always good times. Always, peacefulness. And you think, oh, do you want to destroy what we have so that we can break a cycle that maybe is or maybe isn't abusive, because I can't really define it. So I think the more we talk about it, the more people will become familiar with what it looks like to be in a controlling situation where you don't have your own real autonomy or identity, and there's a lot of control. It almost always escalates and becomes worse and worse and worse. So,
it's very rare, just from my experience and my conversations and what I've been seeing, is very rare for there to be consistent abuse and then the abuser actually changes.
yeah.
And when I see someone who stays and they're saying, "Oh, it's better now," I'm
Mhm.
just like, "Oh gosh, no."
I
Let
know.
them be better now with someone else,
Yes,
because it's not if they're not, like, healing takes time, and we don't know how long that time is for each individual person.
that's
And if
right.
someone is carrying trauma, like a baggage of trauma, which a lot of us carry a baggage of trauma,
Yep.
but the person with their baggage is taking it out on someone else instead of addressing it and healing from it,
Yeah.
you don't know how long it's going to take for them to really heal, because they have to get vulnerable. And the reason I believe that people are abusive is because they're afraid to get vulnerable and face what they went through.
Amen. Yep, that's exactly right. And the more that that person can basically take their trauma and dump it onto you, it becomes more and more not just in their mind your responsibility, but almost like you assume the position of, it's my fault you had that trauma, even though it has nothing to do with me. You know, Somehow all the authority, or whatever, all the responsibility is placed on the abuse victim for the person who refuses to address their own healing.
Yep.
And that's unfair. We are not responsible for somebody else's trauma. We are only responsible for our own trauma. And the fact that we are responsible for our own trauma means that if we ignore it, we are disregarding that responsibility. And it's not going to get better. It's not going to heal. And we're just as likely to become the abuser as our abuser. So it's super important that we do the work to heal, um, especially as a society, because we just have to start having some safe places and some real raw conversations about how we're to live our lives in fullness so that those around us can also live their lives in fullness. Like I know my ex-husband has traumas from his past. I absolutely know that, but they're not my responsibility. And I can love him all I want. It's still not going to change who owns that responsibility. And I'll be damned if I take my healing journey and ignore it and put the responsibility onto someone else. I feel like, and maybe this is a harsh statement, but I feel like it's cowardly to not address what was done to you and then just let it fester so that you can do it to somebody else.
Yeah. That
It's not
statement's not going to sit
brave.
well with everybody. It's not going to sit well with everybody, but that,
Hmm.
I mean, that's what it is, because the problem is you've lived through a trauma,
Hmm.
and then in order to heal it, you have to go back into it.
Yeah.
But what's crazy about that is
Mhm.
that because you're holding on to it, you're
Mhm.
still living through it because you
Yeah.
have healed and released it.
Yeah. Yep.
And like you said, it's not anyone else's responsibility. And then the person who's being abused, because you love this person, you love the potential of this person and what you hope this person, because like a lot of times in abusive relationships, the person that's abusing is
Mhm.
at the core, you can see so much potential in that person. Like you have the ability to do something amazing in this world.
Yeah.
But because you didn't heal, you're doing all of these things, and now you're taking it out on this other person that
Yeah.
is trying to love you. And like you said, you can't love someone back to healthy. You can't love someone back to heal. This is not
No.
how trauma works.
Right.
And it's just unfortunate that
Mhm.
because we don't have these conversations with our parents, with our siblings, with our aunts and uncles too,
Mhm. Yeah.
because everybody has been around to witness something that our grandparents and our great grandparents are no longer here to share.
Yeah.
And because they experienced it or witnessed it, they're holding on to it because they don't want to talk about it. And you're just almost like dooming the rest of your family lineage simply
Yeah.
because you are afraid
Mhm.
and like you said, cowardly to have this conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
And
we get one life. And there are times where I still very much feel the weight of being a 58-year-old woman, having had spent so much time under the thumb of other people who didn't see me valuable enough to protect me and, really get to know me and my desires and passions and interests. I'm a very passionate woman. I have a lot of goals in my heart. And so I look at that and I'm like, oh, I've lost so much time to other people's hurts. And I'm angry, which is a hard thing for me. Anger is very, very hard for me. I was never allowed to be angry ever. Um, and then I remind myself, because I only have one life, I refuse to let what happened to me stifle my potential or what I can accomplish in the years I have left. Um, and I can see where people can even take that as a toxic positivity, statement and go, I haven't got time to deal with this crap that happened to me. I'm just going to move forward. But it doesn't matter. You bring this crap with you. And so you have to constantly work at addressing those things. And they're never one and done issues. You hit something, you're like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see that in context. And you think, got it. And you can move forward, but something's always going to bring you back to that trauma and that context, and you get to see something new about that, and you're like, oh my gosh, the reason why that occurred in that context was because this occurred in that context. So it's got to be a constant e- examination of yourself, what you've been through, what you're feeling about that, and how are you going to take that and, I say resolve, but resolve it enough that you can take a healthy response in the future as you grow. So it's a heavy work.
It's heavy work and people don't want to do it. That's
I
why we're
know,
here.
but it's so worth it because we're worth it. Our lives are worth it. And I do look at, the people I know, like my dad had a not great upbringing, and I know my husband had some big issues in his upbringing. And I'm like, oh, I hurt for you because you have that, but you're refusing to address it. You're stifling your own life, your own potential, just because it seems more comfortable not to, because you just want to ignore that and walk away. And that's like ignoring, if I were to look at my body and say, my heart's broken, so I'm literally just going to leave my heart out of it. And you can't do that and live a full life. So you have to address those problems, or what you have coming down the future is going to be very unfulfilling. And I think I saw that a lot in my husband over the past dozen years before our separation and divorce. Was he died to himself more and more and more. And the more he died to himself and, embracing us as a family and me as his wife, and as a partnership, the more angry he got. And anger just built up and built up and built up. And it was destroying him. I don't know where how he is now, but I hope he gets some healing. I doubt it, just because of the environment that he has been so saturated in. The people that surround him now survive based on lies and anger and all that sort of stuff. So they're really just feeding a monster. And that's a shame, because I think my husband had really great potential to be a kind and generous man. He just chose to ignore that part of himself, to let that part die. And with it, he lost his wife and his daughters.
Wow.
Yeah,
So let's talk about him for just a minute.
sure.
Because you said that he had experienced trauma growing up as well. So we went through like decades.
Hmm.
What, three, at least three known generations on
Yeah.
your side, gracious.
Uh-huh.
And so with him, what was the toxic environment? I mean, it sounds like he opened up to you a little bit or just enough for you to understand. So what was the toxic environment that he grew up in?
His family is all from England. He was actually a dual citizen, first one in his family born in the United States. So he has an older brother, an older sister, and then a younger brother that's about, I think he's 10 or 11 years younger than my husband. And there was a loss of a baby or two, I think, in between my husband and his youngest brother. My husband's father passed away 5 days after he and I started dating. He had a brain tumor, and he died in my husband's arms the day before his 19th birthday. So that was a lot. Um, his dad was Royal British Navy. So he ruled the roost, and he ruled it with a military style hand. Um, his older brother was very aggressive. I know that there were a lot of fights between his older brother and him. His sister, I know that his older brother and sister both were into drugs. Pretty sure his brother became a drug dealer. And his sister ended up marrying her husband just to spite her father. Um, yeah. So like, not good things. Um, I know that there were times when my husband's father would take out his aggression on helpless things. They had a cat for a short term. I think it was my his sister's cat, and it got in my husband's father's way, and so he kicked the cat down the stairs. So there's a violence level there that, and they really, as a family, they own that last name privilege of being angry. it is a family history line of being the angry, intimidating, mean people. And so it's funny because as things got progressed in our separation and divorce, I came across a profile picture of his younger brother. And it's just this very menacing, dark shadowed eyes. Just that's them as a family. And I think it came down through his dad um, into the family line, and they just learned to embrace it. At one point, because I know that my husband's older brother had been picking on him, and then he fell asleep on the floor. And his dad says, "Go ahead, mate, have a go at him," figuring that my husband would like punch him or something. And instead, my husband walked up to his sleeping brother, drew back his foot, and kicked him in the face as hard as he could. Broke his nose, blood everywhere. And the story goes that his father was laughing, thought it was hilarious that my husband had kicked his big brother in the face. And through his laughter, because of course the brother woke up furious that, he had just gotten assaulted. Um, and the dad was like, "No, no, no," laughing, "It's okay. It's okay. I told him to do it." So that kind of embroiled toxic masculinity and love of violence and personification of intimidation was very prevalent in his home. And I know it permeated more than what he spoke of, but that's what I know.
Oh, for sure. Almost always what they do share is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's scary. That's
Hmm.
something that when you are out there, whoever's listening, that when you are out there dating and you do see the signs, you can't ignore it. Like you can, but you should not ignore them because
It's
they're
not a one.
being on their best behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people go, "Oh, that was just a one time thing." No, it was a one time you saw it, but it's there. It's ingrained in their personhood of this is acceptable. And
Right.
sometimes what you see in a one off starts to become more of a pattern that you see because now they've already exposed that part of them, and you know, you didn't squelch it, you accepted it. In fact, there's a saying I heard once and it stuck with me. It's what you accept, you teach. And that's the truth because what we accept as behavior to us, we teach that's okay. Go ahead and escalate it more. And then if you accept, you teach that's okay. Go ahead and do more. And so staying silent is never the best option.
Man, that was good. That is a really, really powerful and true statement.
Yeah.
And when you get caught in that cycle of that accepting and that
Yeah.
teaching and then the bar being raised, it's
Hmm.
not going to take too many raised bars for you to not be able to, like, at after probably the third bar,
Hmm.
if you let that go on to the next level, whatever that is, depending on how slowly they progress, there's
Hmm.
not going to be anything you can ever say at that point that's going to get them to draw back and be like, okay, well, we'll just do these three things. No, the gate is wide open at this point.
Yeah. Yep. Forget it now. The horses have done been let out, and you're not going to be able to get them back in.
You're not. You're not. So before we get into the incident um of your husband's dad,
Mhm.
homeboy, I'm not calling him your husband. I'm sorry. I
Totally fine.
just
I've
went
done it
a little.
for we were married for 36 years. So husband just still seems so natural. I try to remember he's my ex-husband. But it's just complicated and it's hard.
Oh no, I mean,
Yeah, but you're good. You can call
that's
him if you want to.
that statement right there though is exact, like that is the image of trauma.
Yeah.
like so many years that it's been sitting up in someone, it's hard to release it. Not that it's impossible and
Right.
not that you shouldn't try, but it really is hard. And so I think that also we have to have grace with ourselves when we're on this healing journey, not to get angry at a reaction because we're only so many months or days or years removed from something that you invested years in, because most people who are in abusive relationships are in abusive relationships. They're not like, okay, if you abuse me, I'm gone. They're not
Yeah,
in abusive relationships. Those folks got it.
exactly.
Those
And it's
people are
funny.
like, oh no, we ain't
Yep.
out there.
It's one of those things you kind of casually say as you're growing up. Oh no, some guy hits me, I'm out of there. So so easy to say until he hits you. And then you're like, what? And then he's all, I'm so sorry. I don't know what got over me. And so you're like, okay. But, it just gets thicker and denser and more suffocating. And it's never as easy as, oh, if he hits me, I'm out of here. You
It's
can't.
not. It's
That's
not.
a rarity.
It is. And you know what? The only time that that's going to work is when these conversations are had.
Hmm.
And when our younger generation is trained to understand that it is not acceptable at it, like there's no play slapping, there's none of that is acceptable.
Yep.
We're just allowing it. And so when we don't have these conversations
Mhm.
and we get into these situations, you fall for the, oh, it won't happen again, and you keep falling for the, oh, it's not going to happen again, or the, well, I'm getting better. Well, I'm sorry, it's always a we thing when they're doing something bad. Well,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
getting better, aren't we, and all of that.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
so you're
So we can
15,
own the blame.
so you can take the blame for the actions
Yeah.
or your response to their actions, and it's just
Mhm.
a whole, it's a whole mess, y'all. It's a whole
Yeah.
mess.
It's a whole mess. It's an ugly, awful, monstrous mess.
Straight up buffoonery, I'm telling you. But that's why we're here. That's why we have these
Yeah,
conversations.
that's right.
So you're 15,
Uh-huh.
he's 19.
Mhm.
How does this conversation go with your parents?
It's funny because just before I started dating my husband, um, I dated another guy and he was 18. And my parents were like, nope, not happening. You're not, we're not dating an 18-year-old. And I was like, okay, fine, but he's a really nice guy. No, didn't happen. And but then I met my ex-husband. We both worked in a dinner theater. And he had that British charm. And so he came over and he was very respectful and he carried himself well and just really overall very charming and kind presentation. So my parents were like, okay, he seems okay. Like that's acceptable. So I was allowed to date him. And we
Now
dated for
hold
6 years.
up.
Yeah.
No, time out. Time out. Hold up. Wait, wait, wait. Did they meet the 18-year-old?
No, they did
They
not.
didn't meet him.
Yeah.
So they didn't get the opportunity to see his character.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So
My
how did
parents
they
just
meet?
Yeah, my parents were just put off by the idea of an 18-year-old wanting to spend time with me, which is valid. At the time, I was like, it's so unfair. But yeah, my husband and I were working together, and so I was going to be around him more. He was definitely somebody that my parents take me to work or whatever and pick me up. They would see and meet more freely than this other 18-year-old that I can't even remember how I met him. I mean, he faded into history.
Quickly?
Yeah, exactly. Because I tell you, the first day I saw my ex husband, I fell in love with him. And I turned to my best friend then and I was like, I'm going to marry that man. And it was on my radar. I was going to catch his eye and he was inevitably going to fall in love with me. And it worked. He did. Or did he? Looking back, it's like, probably wasn't love. Probably was more of a lust.
She said, oh no. Oh my gosh. Wow. And it starts like that. Like it's so crazy, y'all. It starts like that. When I,
Yeah.
like you just said charming. I can't even count how many interviews I've done where that's the character trait. Oh, he
Yeah.
was so charming. And it just
Yeah.
makes me think like of Disney movies. And I'm like, these Prince Charming characters, because really when you get the princess, they can't really do what they want to do anyways. They have to then be the princess and they have to abide by whatever the law of the land is. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, is
Yeah.
Disney on to something? Like Disney's hiding stuff
Uh-huh. Yeah.
in
Trauma.
broad daylight.
There's a Disney trauma vault.
Yes. Hear me, people, young people. There's
Yeah.
no Prince Charming. If
No,
you
not
find
at
someone,
all.
you're like, oh, he's so charming, cut it out.
Yep.
No, I'm kidding.
That's
Get
your
to
first
know
red
him. Get to
flag.
know him. Check out the flags though, but get to
Yeah.
know him. So he's charming.
Yeah.
Oh
Very
my goodness, he
polite,
has
very
the British
respectful.
accent.
Yep. Oh, yes.
Carries himself very well. I
Absolutely.
can see it. I can see it.
Yeah.
And then he's respectful in front of your parents and when your parents aren't around.
Yes. Yep. And I was a very mature young woman. So, like my senior year of high school, I went to three different schools. I was very focused on my studies. I was a great student. Um, I had a lot of, irons in the fire that I was doing big things ahead of my peers. So I think they were like, okay, so he seems really good and respectful and charming, and she's pretty, focused on her future and taking things seriously. So that this is probably going to be fine because both seem mature enough to handle this. So sometimes even our own character can set us up for a failure because we seem like we've got it all together, but we're still like, for me at 15, I was still a baby. I didn't know better. I didn't know what to look for. And from what I studied about narcissistic abuse is narcissists can hold up that image for years before they break down and start acting on their inner person disorder. So yeah, I shouldn't have been looking for Mr. Right at 15 because he was Mr. Wrong.
But it's hard though. Like
It is.
for for the for the people who are just I love love. I'm one of those people. I'm a hopeful. I don't say hopeless. I always say I'm a hopeful romantic. I'm sappy. I'm all the maple syrup. I'm that.
Yeah. No.
And it
Yeah.
in your mind, like you want to be committed to one person, even at a young age. You're like, oh, I'm gonna find this guy. We're gonna love each other and be friends and get to know each other. And so it's no fault of your own, I don't think.
Right.
And I really don't think it
Mhm.
could be influenced by the little cartoons that we watch because it's always there. There's always a
Yeah.
love interest. But I think for some of us, it's just
Mhm.
you want when you grow older, especially, I don't know, you just want that
Yeah.
partner, that companionship that's already ingrained in us. It's just like pumping a little louder, I
Yeah.
think. And so
Yep.
we forego a lot of signs and we say, oh, I can put up with it. And it's like, you can put up with it now, but you can't
Right.
really put up with it for the rest of your life.
That's right.
So tell me about this transition then. So y'all working together at the movie theater. Everything's going good. Like how long were y'all working together before y'all started dating? And then
That's a
how
good question.
long?
We probably worked together for 6 months before we started dating. Um, and that whole time I was just like, eyes on him, eyes on the prize. In fact, at one point, I do wear glasses. And I had glasses on and I had arranged this night. So we were bussing tables. It was a live theater, dinner theater. And so the guests would come, they'd have a meal, and then there would be part of the performance, and then they'd have dessert at intermission. So, it was kind of ebb and flow of activities. So it's like, okay, they're going to be eating their dinner, and then we got to clear tables before the show starts. And I arranged it so that my section was very light and my husband's section was full. So I got to come to his
Did you
rescue.
arrange this at 15? Are
I
you the
did.
manager?
I talked with my manager. I was like, help me out here. And so I did, and I, did my makeup perfect. I had long hair at the time, and so he came in with his bus tub, and he like threw it down on the kitchen sink area for the dishwasher, and he grabbed another one to head out the door. And I call his name and grabbing a tub, like, "Hey, I can help you." And as I grabbed the tub, I kind of it gripped a bit, and the kitchen floor got really wet and sloppy, and I went down face first, right as he turns around in the doorway, and my glasses fall off my face and skitter to his feet. I have got chunks of lasagna noodles on my chest. I have cod or flounder in my hair. The entire kitchen stops and they're like, "Yeah, Michelle, good job." He said, "I looked down and I felt so sorry for you." And I was like, that was not the feeling I was going for. That was just not what I was going for that night. So try as we may.
That is an epic story. My cheek hurts.
Every time I tell it, people are like, "Oh my gosh, tell the part where your glasses skitter to his feet."
My cheeks hurt.
But yeah, he helped me up, and I
Oh
did
my
still help
gosh.
him. I still saved the day and helped him, clear his section in time and all that. I smelled like fish, but I was still adorable.
That was your hook, line, and sinker right there.
It
That was
was
all
absolutely.
all he
Girls want to
needed.
catch a guy, throw some food on yourself at his feet.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So y'all are busting tables. You
Yeah,
start dating. Oh
yeah.
my goodness.
And I tell you what, our first 11 months, we never had a fight or a bicker or anything. Absolutely like perfection, like the angels sang every time we got together. And then we had our first argument, and I remember it kind of just doing a little click in my chest, like that was an unexpected twist. He had a 68 Camaro, and he was working the intermission shift. So he was going to be doing dishes after the dessert time was over, and which gives you a little bit of time while that first act is happening on stage. You've got some freedom. So he was washing his beautiful Camaro in the back of the restaurant area. And I was trying to get his attention, and I couldn't get his attention. I threw an M&M at him, and it hit his car. And he looked up and he goes, "You," and it was just vitriol. It was just so heated. And it was one single M&M. And I was a tiny bit of a smartass. And so I took my whole handful of M&Ms and I threw it, and it pelted his whole car. But I also knew at that point I'd better run. And so I did. I ran from him. And I'm pretty sure he was chasing. Yeah, I know he was chasing me. I don't remember if he came all the way to where I ended up or if he stopped at the kitchen. I can't remember that point. But yeah, that was having never had any kind of conflict. That one M&M hit his car, that he came out so fierce and fiery. Um, I should have, you know, I didn't know at the time. And that's why we're talking, because we didn't know at the time how to spot a red flag, how to respond to anything that made us feel a little bit uncomfortable, or like there was a shift of power that made you vulnerable to somebody else's anger and behavior. um, I just didn't know what to do with that. And of course, as time went on, it became more and more prevalent.
Mm, okay. So how did y'all move past that? I mean, first of all, this
Mhm.
situation is happening while you're both at work.
Yeah. Hmm.
So you run past like through the kitchen into the kitchen. Like
Yeah. And then
how
I
do you
go
people
I went
there.
backstage and I went past the backstage area into where we would set up food like a buffet. And I just hung out there because that's where the box office people were. I would be in the back of the box office and their door was open. So I was no longer alone. I had some people there to witness any behavior. And then of course it was just, oh, sorry, I was just really focused on doing what I was doing. I didn't mean to do all that. So, you know, it just gets passed away.
So after that first incident, do
Mhm.
you feel as you look back on the situation that the incidences were more frequent and more rage induced a
Yes.
lot in like in a shorter period of time?
Yeah, absolutely. They all tended to focus on obviously his needs or his feelings or that sort of thing. He was being of British descent. Alcohol is very much part of the culture of their family. You know, you can drink at any age in England. So he,
Really?
yeah, yeah,
Don't
he
y'all go
was
running over to
almost
England. Don't y'all do that.
exactly. No, 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 no. But, like it was commonplace as, 10 or 11 years old, you get a pint of beer when you order a burger, fish and chips or whatever. Like it's just a beverage. And so he was always around alcohol growing up. And he was, drank a lot of beer when we were dating. I was drinking a lot of beer, just because it was the in thing, the culture of a teenager and what have you. You go to parties, there's always a keg somewhere. So there was always, at least to some degree, some alcohol involved. Then it could also be things like sports. Very, very big into football, and I think they're now called the Commanders. They had been the Washington Redskins. Um, obsessed, obsessed with football. So anytime there was a football game that didn't go well, or like it would be a horrible time for days because his mood was directly affected by how they played or won a game, lost a game. It was like a personal affront to him. Like they lost on purpose to spite him, and it could get really ugly. At one point, we had a friend who he was working a landscaping company, and he had gotten to have the use of like the social club that they have in some apartment complexes or what have you, where you can hold parties. And so he had a Super Bowl party, and we went, and the Washington Redskins were playing and they were not doing well. And my husband's anger got so out of control. He was like flipping tables of chips and dips and screaming and yelling and throwing things and, all this kind of crazy behavior. And our friend was like, dude, you can't do this. I work here. Like this can't be happening. And I remember that my husband's best friend growing up was like, I'll take you home. I'll take you home because you can't be in a car with him. So I was like, okay, yeah, I prefer that. But it was his anger and temper was almost well, it was acceptable and expected amongst his peers and his friend groups. That's just again, it's that family persona of being the one to have the rage and all that, that it was acceptable to a degree, and so yeah, we had some times where things didn't go his way, and he would just act how he felt he was entitled to act. We had gone to a party once, and by this point I was probably in college, and we went to a party and I was with my friends, and I love to dance. Oh my goodness. And so the music was just going, and my girlfriends and I were dancing. And apparently there was a guy who had noticed me and was kind of flirty and had mentioned, not realizing that my boyfriend, my husband, was my boyfriend. And he's like, made a comment about me dancing. And so my husband then, boyfriend at the time, came to me and was like, "Stop dancing. No more dancing for you." He says, "That guy is watching you." And I was like, I'd had a few beers. I was like, I am having fun with my girlfriends. I'm like, if you want to dance with me, then you dance with me. Otherwise, I'm going to keep dancing with my girlfriends. And so we kept dancing, and the guy was watching me. He didn't make a move towards me or say anything to me or even say anything more to my husband. And my husband just walked over and punched a hole in the wall. End of party. Party died at that point. Everybody went home. And it took him a long, like, I don't even know. I feel like he did apologize at some point. Like, I shouldn't have let my anger get to that point where I punched a hole. But it wasn't necessarily that he was apologizing for that controlling behavior. It was that he did punch a hole in someone's wall and he had promised to go fix it and he never did. So that part he'll own. He didn't do that. But he was justified to punch the hole in the wall. And I believe that that was not just a message to the guy who was watching me. It was a message to me. I didn't stop dancing like he told me to. So therefore, that was partially intended for me. And, things just had kind of gotten that way. And again, just very, very acceptable. Um, and then we got married. I was just 21, and I remember I got pregnant very quickly after our marriage. Our daughter was born 3 weeks before our first anniversary. And we were not trying to get pregnant. We were going to do that whole let's be married for a few years, just the two of us, and then we'll, start a family. And that did not happen. Again, God thought that was funny. So I got pregnant right away, and I had pretty bad morning sickness, like really severe. And I vomited a lot. I cried a lot. I was unprepared. Again, I was so very young, and we weren't trying. We were actively trying not to. And I remember at one point my husband being so angry with me, and he grabbed my arms and he kind of lifted me up and he was screaming at me. And I was still in my sassy era, and I was like, "Go ahead, hit me. Just do it. Just go ahead." Like I was somehow gonna come back and punch him or something and beat him up. And he put me down and we both started laughing like that would be crazy. He says, "If I hit you, I'd kill you." And I was like, "Yeah, don't hit me. I don't know why I told you go ahead and hit me. Don't do that." And but from that point on, there was always just this understood level that was like, if I hit you, I'd kill you. So I'm not going to hit you because I could kill you, but if I did hit you, I'd kill you. And it's this unspoken language amongst the spoken words that you understand that you don't want to push a limit too far because it could be too dangerous to do that. And I just really wanted to be the perfect wife. I just wanted to be the one who I made jams and preserves and I cooked dinner and the house was so clean and all this stuff. I mean, our first year together, I was so intent on being the best. And I take it back. Probably not the first summer we were together because I was already pregnant and vomiting. It's probably the second year. Um, I picked 21 pounds of strawberries to make jam for my husband and I and our little baby. Like, what was I thinking? Like, I could have fed the whole neighborhood with the amount of strawberries I had picked and canned, but I just thought that's a good mom. Make sure the shelves are well stocked. And yeah, so it it was this very slow, and of course, I think a lot has to do with our mentality as women in a patriarchal society. That if you're going to be the good wife, you're going to be the one who takes care of everything, and you're going to be happy and sweet and charming, all the beautiful painted pictures. And one of my favorite movies is Ever After. Are you familiar with that? It's Drew Barrymore, and it's kind of the retelling of a Cinderella movie. And at one point, she is trying to get the older gentleman servant that had always been in their household back. He had been put into prison and was about to be sold to the Americas. And she encounters the prince at this point, and he says, you have something to say with about, go ahead and say it. And she's like, well, we first, what are we to come to a conclusion about if you don't first make criminals and then punish them? And I'm like, if we look at the patriarchy, what are we to assume that they don't first make victims and then hurt us? So we're taught as women from a very early age that whole Disney thing of, Snow White lived with her seven dwarfs that she cooked and she cleaned and she was so happy and everything was wonderful, and we go across that with all the stories over and over and over again, to be the perfect woman, you you shape yourself into this expectation. And what it is society is making us to be victims. And then we become victimized because it's expected of us. And I really think that that was a true line for me and my growing family, was that I needed to fall into that role of being so submissive and so wonderful that I wouldn't have a voice to oppose him in any way.
Woo, that quiet, especially if you're someone who's very sociable. That quiet thing,
Yeah.
and you don't even have to be disrespectful with it.
No.
It's just you don't have a place to
Yeah.
speak back on this.
Right.
Because in
Yeah.
my head, I've had the conversation. This is what it's going to be. I'm just giving you the courtesy of letting you know what you're about to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's kind of this gentle but definitive leadership of, I'm going to say this nicely, but you're going to go and do this and you're going to behave that way. And these are the expectations that you are going to follow. Okay, honey? All right. And you're like, oh yeah, yeah, of course I can do that. And then you do get those rare moments in a relationship where you talk about your dreams and your desires and what you'd like to leave as your mark on the world, and they listen, and you think that they are appreciating you as a person, but honestly they're taking that information and they're storing it up as fodder for how can they come back and hurt you, how can they squash those dreams or make them become a reality so that you get, he gets the benefit of that. Um, and that you're basically the nice slave at home, the indentured servant who really doesn't have a voice and doesn't get to have those passions and thoughts and dreams. Um, Even if it's something as simple as like you're creative. I love to do things that are creative. So anything I would want to make and do is arts and crafts. He called it arts and craps. So right there, my creativity was dismantled as being a juvenile, crappy idea. And there's so many ways that you can be dismissed as a human being, of someone with value, and then they use it as a tool against you.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So many, and you're right. Like it's the buildup of, and I'm not going to put it all on them
Right.
because a lot of us are this way. We're not educated. We don't have the conversation of how to have healthy disagreements.
Yeah.
And so a lot of us, everybody who hasn't worked on how to communicate when you're upset about something in a respectful way and be able to be quiet and listen, we
Mhm.
store things like,
Mhm.
okay, we're keeping a tally in our head of what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And with them, it just seems like it's just more weight on the hammer.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna add a little more weight on this hammer because of what you think you want to do. That's not what you're here to do. You're here to be under my leadership. You're here to follow my vision for
Yeah.
for my family and this blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
So I completely understand what you're saying in that regards. So
Mhm.
so when y'all went from the 11th month, and here's my question. You went from 11 months, y'all were dating for about 6 years,
Yeah.
right? And then
Mhm.
y'all got married, you got pregnant.
Mhm.
Between that incident with the car
Mhm.
and the Mustang, right? The
Yeah.
incident with the Mustang and the incident where he grabs you, had he ever put his hands on you, grabbed you, or done anything like that?
Hmm. I don't I don't know. That's a good question. I do have to admit that there are some things in my memory that I don't remember. I My older daughter and I had been in a car accident in 2016. I did sustain a brain injury, so some is due to that. A lot of it, though, is due to the PTSD. So there are some areas I can look back on and go, I don't know. My brain's just not willing to take me there. Um, I don't know if prior to that point, if he had ever put his hands on me. He may have done some pushing or shoving. Um, but I believe that the demeanor in situations where he wanted to have that control over me, it was pretty much just a presence, a almost like this living threat that's right in front of you that you don't want to engage that beast because we don't know what could happen. So a lot of intimidation and things of that nature that can go unidentifiable, but you get their vibe, and so you pick up that vibe and you protect yourself.
Yeah, you definitely feel it. And for anyone who doesn't know, intimidation is abuse. It's a form
Oh,
of control, it's a form of manipulation, and it's a form of keeping you from doing your, like, exercising your free will under their control. The
yeah.
reason I asked that question though is because from my own research is what I'm learning, and I don't know the number statistic wise,
Mhm.
but when a woman becomes pregnant, it increases the likelihood that that person is either going to start being physically abusive or they're going to escalate the physical abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely endured that. There was a lot of humiliation in me having morning sickness. So here I was just puking my guts out. I, at one point, was taken to the hospital because I was so dehydrated from vomiting. Um, but I would still also have some periods of time where I could rally and I'd feel better in those moments. And I knew that they were fleeting moments. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna do the laundry because I feel I can do that right now. I got accused of faking the morning sickness. Um, there was just a lot of pressure. Like I was so inconvenient to be vomiting so much that he would have to actually get up and take care of some things. Um, it was it was awful. I remember with my second daughter, um, again, the morning sickness hit and I was really, really sick. I had spent time in the hospital, hyperemesis, um, all the things. And I got out of the hospital on a Friday and we were scheduled to go on vacation Saturday morning. And man, we went on vacation. It did not matter that I was weak and anemic and just so sick, and we had to go at the time he wanted to go. Like, it couldn't be like, "Could I get through the morning and could we go a little later?" No. We had to go in the car that day at 5 a.m., hit the roads, and get to his vacation. It wasn't our vacation, it was always his vacation. It was always mapped as our vacation. I did all the packing, all the planning, all the prep work. I did it all. But, he's the one who earned that vacation. So he wasn't going to miss out on any of it. And it didn't matter what my personal toll was. He was like, it's okay because once we get there, you can just lay in the bed. I was like, wow, that sounds like a lot of fun. And so, yeah, I definitely know that throughout both my pregnancies, because I was so sick, it made him have to carry more of a load than he had carried previously because I was always carrying everything in the house, everything. He had the job. I handled all the finances, all the meals, all the cleaning, all the everything. And I also did daycare in the house. So I had to earn money as well as handle everything. And
Just a second.
yeah.
Why You feel like you had to earn money?
We didn't make a lot. He didn't make a lot. So to meet our needs financially, I would need to be working. And I had before I had my first daughter, I was teaching in a school. Um, but it was like a daycare center. I had gone through my education degree at University of Maryland, but I didn't get to the point of doing my student teaching. It was new within that last year of my education that you had to be 21 before you could enter in as a teacher. So I was still 20, which meant that my placement position was put in the back. So every person in my education block who was older than me would get their placements first, and there weren't placements enough to go around. So the idea was I would take off that spring semester, we would get married, and I'd go back in the fall and I would do my student teaching as I was turning 21 at that time. Um, and then I could finish out my degree. But I got pregnant and I was so sick, I didn't go back. So I think he was counting on us both having income, and then I didn't. And then of course, what do you do with your child once you have them? Do you want to find somebody who can care for your child, or do you want to stay home with them? And so we decided it would probably be best if I stayed home and do daycare at home so that I could earn money that way. So at times I was taking care of three babies at a time and doing everything. And of course, any money that I brought in, as him being the head of the household, it was his money. But nothing was ever my money. So it was hard. I do remember once, and it just devastated me. As I was doing laundry, whenever he left money in his pockets or whatever, I would put them in a jar on top of a shelf in the laundry room. And that was my money. I was going to do something with that money. And so I had plans. I thought, oh, we're going to go out to dinner. Once I get, X amount of money, we're going to go out to dinner and I'll have paid for dinner because, I gathered this money through the laundry. And he just decided he needed that money one day, so he just took it because it was his money anyway. And I remember feeling like, but I was saving that for us, and you took it for you. And he's like, well, it's my money anyway. And I'm like, everything's your money anyway. I have zero, nothing, anything. So yeah, money is a major factor in abuse and violence. It's just, and right up until we came to an agreement in our settlement for divorce, it was all about the money. And there's nothing more dehumanizing than having a 40-year relationship with someone and it all comes down to the dollars. I loved him with my whole heart and soul. I was beside him um, as much as I could have been. I tried to set boundaries that could be healthy, and they were disregarded. But I tried everything I could to make it work. And then when it came down to everything, it came down to where are all the dollars? He wanted them all, and we didn't have much. We just didn't have much at all. So it's just you feel like nothing more than disposable at that point. And I assumed that that's what I was.
As I look back on it, I feel like the financial abuse, which is basically just having the majority control, in
Mhm.
hindsight, it's like I need to control all the money
Mhm.
because there's only a matter of time that you're going to keep putting up with this.
Yeah.
And if I have all the money, it's
Mhm.
not going to be easy for you to just walk away.
Right.
If
And
I may
what's funny?
put your money in this pile.
Yeah. He had me do all the finances, so I had to pay all the bills. And I would beg him, please help me do this. He bought stuff. He bought stuff for himself all the time. I cannot even tell you how frustrating it was to get near Christmas or a birthday and I would be like, "Oh, I know what he really wants. I'm going to get him this thing. He's going to love it." And he'd just go and buy it for himself just before the holiday or the birthday or the event or whatever. And I was like, I was going to get that for you. But he was so focused on fulfilling his needs that he didn't want to, take a chance that I wasn't. But I was very, very generous with him. Always. We had a Christmas where we had, our two daughters, and times were very, very tight. And so we were like, look, we're just gonna be bare bones about gift giving, this year. But I still got him like a couple shirts or whatever. And I made sure that the girls had something to give to their dad, all that. I got literally nothing, not one single solitary gift. And let me just say that for most of his side of the gift giving, so like he would take our daughters, usually Christmas Eve, to the Dollar Tree and he would give them each $10. And that's what they could spend on me. And so I got $20 of Dollar Tree stuff. And yeah, it's sweet, all that. And I would never hold this against my daughters for doing that. And I'm sure they had a blast doing it. That's a great experience for them to have that. But I made sure my daughters gave their dad nice gifts. I put the thought into it. What would work? Sometimes I would have them make, world's greatest dad mugs or whatever with the color the pictures in and, get it processed and come home. He literally put no thought or effort into anything. And then when he did, at one point, he had gotten a sales job in carpeting, and his boss had been friends of ours from church. And they would sometimes earn these perks from the manufacturers. And every time my husband earned a perk, he got himself something. And one year, his boss was like, "You need to do something nice for your wife." So that Christmas morning, we unwrapped gifts and I got a treasure hunt, you know, follow the lead kind of things. And I was like, what is all this? Like, yo, he put some effort into this. And so eventually it got to where I was back to the Christmas tree and up in the tree's angel, she was holding a diamond set of earrings. And I was like, oh my gosh, you got me diamond earrings? It's like, this is amazing. I've never gotten gifts like that, ever. And my birthday's in December. So, you know, I never got my birthday and Christmas. I got just one thing. Um, and so I was just astonished. I was like, wow, I was given diamond earrings by my husband. And almost instantly, he says, yeah, he said, I earned some perks from this, manufacturer. He said, and Jim made me get you diamond earrings. What I really wanted to do was get myself a gold watch, but he said I couldn't do that. If I didn't get something for you, I couldn't use the points. Man, talk about feeling like you're shot in the face. Like, it's such a gut punch for them to literally vocalize that they didn't want to be generous, that this was not a gift that they felt they wanted to give. It was a sacrifice. What he really wanted was something for himself. So I should just accept that gift, not just that it was diamond earrings, but that it meant he had to give up something for himself that he didn't even have and he didn't need because he always had a watch. But yeah, that's life with somebody who doesn't see you as valuable but sees you as profitable to them.
Profitable and property.
Yep, absolutely.
That's what it is. So it
Yes.
sounds like a lot of the abuse that you were experiencing was control, it was neglect, it was
Yes.
shame, it was just psychological
Yeah.
demeaning and trying to make you feel like you weren't valuable, like he wouldn't respect you,
Yeah.
and you're just gonna have to sit here and take it.
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever he gave me, I should be grateful for. Whether it's being ignored. He was excellent at stonewalling. Um, Lots of gaslighting, of course, because it's so easy to make an accusation that is wrong, but now he's just said it. So you're like, if he's right, I'm a horrible person. And so you end up second guessing yourself. At one point, in our later years of being married, he literally gave me the silent treatment for 3 months. For 3 months he did not talk to me other than whatever just had to be said. Otherwise I didn't deserve a conversation. No explanation. He just silent treatment. And at one, after, for whatever reason, that resolved and he went back to talking to me, I brought it up once in an argument and I said, you didn't talk to me for 3 months. I said, you never even told me why you didn't talk to me for 3 months. And the look on his face was sheer pleasure. Like he did it. And like I could almost see him going, next time it's going to be twice as long. Next time you're going to go 6 months without me talking to you. And I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't breaking his heart that he treated me this way. It's making him feel proud. And that, again, the dehumanization is so profound that when you make a plea to someone that you love and who constantly, I mean, right up until the last week before things really took a pivotal trauma point, he was screaming at me, I love you. I would die for you. And I was like, I first of all, that's a cop out of a statement. Um, so easy to say that. So easy to say I would die for you. And I'm like, I would never want you to die for me, but I would like you to live with me. I want you, I want our lives to line up, that we are in this together. I don't want to be something that you would live or die for. That's, again, it's just dehumanizing. Um, but that was his motivation, just he he garnered attention and prestige from me. So in about I think it was 2009, God had laid on my heart to start this drama ministry team with teenagers. And still living under that patriarchal societal idea, but also that foundationally fundamental Christian idea that men are the leaders of their homes and women submit. And, so, we're still living under that sort of thing. So God has really been pushing me to go for this ministry, and I'm like, God, I don't want to do it. I had every excuse in the book to be like, no, these teenagers, they can't be focused, they're so immature, they're not ready yet, we need to study other you know principles of you, Lord. I was just going to lower myself to be like, God, it's for you, when in reality I was like, I don't want to do this. But God broke through that barrier and he's like, girlfriend, you're not wanting to do this because of me. It's because you don't want to do it. So either you can listen up or you can shut up. So I did a little both. I was like, I'll shut up and I'll listen. When it was just us, he was very demeaning and degrading about the work that I did. But the second that we stepped through the church doors, he's like, I know, isn't my wife incredible? Isn't she doing awesome work for the Lord? And they would cut out articles and they'd put them up on the bulletin boards of church. And he'd be like, yep, that's my wife. And then he'd come home and be like, yeah, I'm really sick and tired of the amount of time you spend on that. And I'm like, do you want me to quit? Like I outright was like, I will quit if it's what you desire, oh Lord. you know? And he would always be like, no, I don't want you to quit. And I was like, yeah, because you like getting the pat on the back for the work that I do. You like being able to rein in those accolades as if they're yours, when in reality, you don't contribute to them. You don't support me in them. I can't tell you how many times, because those teens meant the world to me too. And they would come over to our house and we would have dinners and things for them there. And we would work on new things and play games. We were basically a mobile youth group in our rehearsal times and such. And he would be very intimidating about it. If you get teenage boys together, they're going to want to, spread their wings. So there were times when they're like, hey, man, I can touch the ceiling down here. And yeah, because they're 15. They've just grown 6 inches in the past 2 days. And so they got to compare each other. And my husband would look at them and go, you want to repaint the ceiling after you touch it? And I'm like, they didn't make it dirty. Okay. It's okay. Just leave them alone. They're fine. Um, and then at one point we had one of the girls had just started learning to drive, and we had a long driveway and our grass was not great. It was mostly crabgrass. And so she had gone off the driveway and into the grass. And he was like, I'll shut this down if those teenagers get on the grass again. They won't be allowed to come over here at all. The next day was a day where his mom came to visit, and she basically gave us a lawn job. Her whole vehicle, she turned around in our yard. That was fine. That was okay. Yeah. Grandma got permission to put massive ruts in our yard. But my teenager who's just learning how to drive left a tire mark, one singular tire mark for about 3 feet. And he would shut her down and not allow her to drive over there again. But that's control for you. And,
Yes.
and my girls and I knew it. There was always this living with understanding that what we did for the Lord was an inconvenience to my husband. And he could pat us on the back for what we did as long as it made him look good. But in reality, it was always an oppression. Again, that sacrifice of him not getting the gold watch that he wanted for himself. This was a sacrifice of his time and energy, even though it never took from him. He liked to pretend he was the victim, that it was taking from him. You know, our worship time of him, the almighty husband and father of our small clan of women, it just, it was too much, too much.
Little House on the Prairie.
Yep,
Oh
I
my God.
know.
Oh my gosh. So out of everything that you experienced, because you said 36, 37 years
Yeah,
of being
marriage.
controlled by someone else.
Yeah, 40 years all total if you count the
If
dating year.
you count the dating, that's right. 40 years with someone. Oh
Mhm.
my goodness.
Yeah. And from the time you're a teenager, young, I mean mid-teen, still
Yeah.
that's young. That's young to be so conditioned.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Gosh. What would you say was the most difficult abusive experience that you had with him?
That would be the point in our relationship where things became irrevocable. So, the last time he physically assaulted me was Super Bowl Sunday of 2022. So that would be February 13th of 2022. I had been sick myself. He had gotten COVID just before Christmas. He was not one to believe in the vaccines, very conspiratorial ideologies. Um, and he also wasn't taking like hand washing seriously, that sort of thing. So when he got COVID, he was the first one in our family, in our home, to get that. And so we were left concerned because, again, he wasn't following the washing of the hands or protecting us or wearing the mask all the time. And our oldest daughter developed a lung condition in college. It was a very moldy campus, so she has a chronic cough. She had chronic, crazy nosebleeds. Um, our younger daughter had been working on a project that was just coming to an end, and she didn't want to have to bail out because she got sick. So they moved in with my best friend, and she has kind of like a little apartment downstairs. So they moved in there, and I stayed to take care of my husband. He has insane high blood pressure. And I was like, he's not going to take care of him because he doesn't take this seriously, and he could very easily die from this infection. So I said, I'm staying to take care of him. My girls were upset with that. They're like, he's just going to get you sick, and it's going to, what if you die? I mean, COVID was still kind of early on in 2021. We were just at the end of a year of it. And the Omicron variant had come out. And so, there was some devastating ideologies around what happens. And I said, no, I can't leave him alone. He will die on his own. So I stayed, took care of him. But the tensions were very high and thick. So when we got to just a couple of days before Christmas, he finally was done with his quarantine. The girls were trying to decide when they're coming back home, and what that would look like, and all that. And they were very angry at him because, he hadn't been taking any precautions to keep us well. Um, I started bleeding really heavy, and I just would not stop bleeding. And so I had seen my doctor sometime in January to be like, I don't know what's going on, but like this is heavy. Like I'm so weak, I can't get up and do things. Um, and we're going through some of the tests and such, and had come to the decision by February that I would need to have a uterine ablation. They would go in and they would just basically cauterize my uterine lining. I had had some fibroid tumors, some they were able to get, some they were not going to be able to get, but it was going to be the only way to stop the bleeding. So on Super Bowl Sunday, that was another heavy day of bleeding for me. I was very, very weak. I just was like a little kitten. I couldn't do anything. So I was sitting downstairs in my little chair with a blanket and just kind of relaxing all day. Both of the girls had things that they had to do. My older daughter she's a bridal hairstylist. So she was meeting a client to do a trial for her hair. And my younger daughter was onto a new project. So she was going to go work with her project people with that. So it was just him and I. And a few years before this, he had kind of shifted his drinking from beer to whiskey. And so most every night he would have anywhere from 3 to 5 8-ounce glasses of whiskey. Yeah, it was an insane amount. And the girls and I kept track of it because we knew once he hit three, if he kept drinking, it would either he would get in a bad mood where he's controlling and, abusive in that way, or he'd get real silly and goofy, and it would be hard to, kind of deal with his silly goofiness. So we would always keep track. And so he had already been drinking since the Super Bowl on the East Coast is like, I don't know, probably starts around noon or 1 o'clock. And so he was, had been drinking, and I was downstairs, and then the girls left, and I thought I should go and, just make us something to eat, some sort of a light meal or whatever. So I came upstairs to do that. And he had been very proud of himself. He had unloaded the dishwasher that day. So, I mean, talking about strides, he did that. But he said, there are a couple things I don't know where they go. So I just left them out on the stove. I was like, okay. I said, do you want me to show you where they go? So, and he goes, yeah, that'd be great. I was like, okay. So when I came up to make us something to eat, I said, hey, is now a good time? Do you want me to show you where those things go? And he was like, yeah, that sounds good. So he came over and he picked up first thing is a frying pan. And I said, cool. I said, do you have an idea where you think it goes? He's like, yeah, I think it goes in this cabinet down here. I was like, yeah, it does. He was like, oh, well, every time I put it in, it falls out. I said, really? I said, that's odd. I said, can you show me how you put it in? I said, maybe there's something in there I could fix. Maybe it's not, I could do a little problem solving here if you could show me how you put it in.
Hold on 1 second.
Oh, sure.
I need the people who are listening to acknowledge the intentional, careful tone that you're having, because even if you're not that careful, but you're just normally talking to him, it's
Mhm.
going to trigger him to go off the handle. And
And it does.
you're ex- you in this moment,
Uh-huh.
like the amount of restraint and
Yeah.
control and intention it
Mhm.
takes to talk slowly,
Mhm.
gently,
Respectfully. Yeah.
soothing, just to get dishes put away is absurd.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that way.
100%. Yep,
We should be
exactly.
able to have an adult conversation, me
Yeah.
not disrespect you, you not take me talking regular to you as disrespect. But I
Right.
wanted it, I needed people to see before anything happens. I needed that moment to be acknowledged, because if you haven't experienced living with anyone who has that trigger like that, you don't get that she's intentionally talking like this.
Yeah.
And
Very
even
calm. You cannot have an emotional response to this kind of manipulative behavior. What my husband had done was actually weaponized incompetence. I can't put this away. Oh, poor me. I don't know how to do it. It's like it's a frying pan, dude. You put it in the cabinet and that's how it goes. Like I could probably hand this frying pan to a 10-year-old and they would just put it in the cabinet. They wouldn't be all like, but I can't do it. It's so hard. And so yeah, the whole conversation, you have to regulate not only your own tone, but you have to regulate how you respond so that you control their responses and emotions. You're now dealing with a fire that's currently burning low, but at any second, it's going to hit a gas line. And when it hits the gas line, it's going to blow up and there will be fallout and there will be injuries. So yeah, so as I'm telling him, just show me how you put it in and maybe I can figure it out. Maybe I can rearrange things, still acting like it's my responsibility to make this, 60-year-old man be able to put a frying pan away. And again, at this point now he's rolling his eyes and he's huffing, he says, I'm going to put it in there, but it's just going to fall out. So I said to him, I said, I said, you're not incompetent. I just want you to do it so I can see how you're doing it and see if I can fix the problem. But I used the word incompetent. I did not call him incompetent. I was very specific. You are not incompetent. But me using it means I was thinking it, which means I'm accusing him, which means now we're about to fight. So he took a moment and he was very rigid and he took that frying pan and he flung it across the kitchen. And within a half second, he was in my face and he is screaming at me and he is spitting on me and my hair is fluffing from his hot, angry breath. And he's like, this is ridiculous. You always do this to me, blah, blah, blah. And then he's shoving me into the kitchen counters. And meanwhile, I am feeling the blood that is coming out. It is pouring down my leg. And I'm like, I cannot fight back. I am too weak for this. I am incapable. And I said, I don't want to do this. And I tried letting him know. I said, this is why I'm afraid of you. Like to let him know I'm scared right now. I'm vulnerable. You're hurting me. You're intimidating and threatening me. And I am absolutely defenseless and physically, emotionally unable to protect myself. And yet here we are. And he would back off for a moment and then come right back in to, again, he's this close to my face. And his face is twisted. Until you've been in front of a man whose face is twisted in rage because he wants to decimate you, you don't know what that feels like. The fear, the almost surrender that this is how it ends. This is where we go. This is how I die. it's somewhat there. And yet at the same time, you're like, I will not let my daughters come home to me being beaten to death. This is not what this is going to happen. And I mean, I had even in previous times had conversations with my husband because he kept a loaded handgun by his bedside that I said, I know you're going to shoot and kill me one day. I said, you're probably not going to do it as an intentional motivation, but you're going to get that gun to put me back in my place, and your rage is going to overtake you and you're going to shoot and kill me. I said, I've already accepted that that's probably how I'm going to die. I said, please don't do that in front of our daughters. You know, you now enter a zone where you are so invaluable to him and to yourself and to the world, but the only thread of existence you have left is protecting your children. And in that vulnerability, I thought, what a horrible thing for them to come home to is my dead body, or for them to hear the gunshots go off and see me get shot and killed in our own home. Like, it's horrific. And there were times where that was nearly the case. And honestly, within just a few weeks of this last occurrence, my daughter thought for sure that my husband was getting the gun to kill me and then himself. She was prepared for a murder suicide because of his rage was out of control. Um, but yeah, so this Super Bowl Sunday, we finally got to that point, and he's doing all this intimidation, and I thought, I can't protect myself. I said, that's it. I said, I'm calling for help. And we had a split foyer. So in that moment, I had left my phone downstairs and I was like, I'm going to go get my phone. And the second that I said, that's it, I'm calling for help, he changed. No, 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 don't do that. Don't do that. You don't want to do that. Don't call anybody. It's okay. It's okay. We're going to talk this out. We're going to work through it. I was like, no, I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. And so as I go to head downstairs to get my phone, he's chasing after me. He's pushing past me. He's like, no, 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 you can't have your phone. So he gets my phone. We wrestle over it. Um, he eventually gets it because he's 100 pounds more than me and so much stronger. And then our home was situated in a way that, being downstairs on our split foyer, you have to go up to the front door, or you could go through the laundry room this way and out through the garage. And he had blocked my path to the front door. So I could have attempted to go, you know, past him and in through the laundry room to the garage. My chances of getting all through those spaces would have been slim to none. He could have easily bolted up and stopped me or caught me or whatever. So I didn't try to escape. And we had this argument that ensued, and he was like, I love you. I would die for you, do anything for you. Why can't you see that? Um, and then our oldest daughter came home, and she came down through the garage and into the laundry room. And I knew at any second she was going to be standing between me and him. And I was terrified. And I thought, I got to control this. If I don't control this moment, we're both in jeopardy. And so I just disengaged from the argument. I looked at her and I welcomed her home. I said, hi. I said, I'm glad you're home. How was your evening? And I mean, obviously, we're in the midst of a very tense situation. And she's like looking, and my husband he's crying. He's got snot coming out of his face. He is red. He is furious. And then he just is, again, utterly angered by me. He says, oh, sure, just cut it off. Just cut off all your emotions and just be the good mommy, welcoming her home. And then he stomped off and left. And I was like, I had no choice but to disengage from that argument with him so that I could put her in a safe space. I mean, she obviously knew right away something was going on, but I was not going to continue that argument in front of her with her between us and him. It wasn't going to happen. And so he went to his room, slammed the door. I tried to very calmly explain what had happened. I said, it's okay. Everything's fine. He's gonna, he'll be in his room. It'll be fine. And the next day, he was very, very contrite. He was very sorry. He was, dog with the tail between his legs, and I'm so sorry. I can't believe I let that get so out of hand. And he's like, I want us to talk. He said, I'll just listen. You can talk. And I said, I just want to feel better. I said, I'm still bleeding. I'm still very weak. Said, let me just feel better and we can talk. And he was already planning to go dog and house sit for his boss on Thursday. So here we are the Monday after Super Bowl. He's going to leave on Thursday. And like, I'm still in shock of what had happened the day before. And so he leaves that Thursday morning for work. He's going to go straight to his boss's house. And he texted me all weekend. I miss you so much. I love you. Can't wait to come home. Blah, blah, blah. And so we get to Sunday, 1 week after his huge blow up about the frying pan. And he texts me, like, just took the dogs out and rode the ATV. He said, just really looking forward to being home with you tomorrow. Can't wait to see you. And my older daughter was giving me a haircut. As being a hairstylist, she can, she was doing that. I said, okay, she'll finish the haircut. I'll take a shower. I'll call him back. And so I got out of the shower, and both of my girls are coming to the bedroom door, and they're like, Mom, we're getting all these weird messages from all the people from his boss's family, like trying to reach you. They're like, get your mom, she has to call. And so I was like, oh, okay. And I look at my phone. I'm like, yeah, I've gotten messages too. I'm like, this is weird. So I start trying to reach out to them, and I can't reach them. So I try to reach my husband. I can't reach him. I finally get the boss's son, who's also a coworker within the place where my husband worked. And he said, you need to call my dad. I said, I tried and I couldn't reach him. I said, what's going on? I said, I don't understand. He says, call my dad. I said, okay. So I try calling his dad again, my husband's boss, where he was staying. And I finally get him, and he goes, Jamie's been in an accident. He's been flown to shock trauma. Um, he flipped the ATV on his head. And I said, oh my God. I said, okay. I said, what can you tell me? He said, well, he was riding the ATV, and thankfully a neighbor, because they're very rich. Their houses are kind of far apart, but apparently a neighbor happened to be backing out of his driveway and happened to see my husband flip an ATV onto his head in the rearview mirror. So he slammed his car in park, and he started running out and yelling for another neighbor who I believe he worked either as a police officer or fireman. Call 911, call 911. So they were able to get EMTs there within 5 minutes. And in short time, he was airlifted out to shock trauma at University of Maryland Medical Center. And that's where he was. So my older daughter and I head straight down to the hospital to see what's going on. I had to go through a process at the hospital because he didn't have ID on him. And as it turns out, I finally got through. I was the only one allowed to go into the trauma bay. So our daughter had to wait in the waiting room. So I got up there, and I met his trauma nurse, and he said, what can you tell us about your husband? And I said, well, I can tell you that, he was approaching 60, I guess. He was 59 at the time of his accident. So I said, or maybe he was 58. Maybe he was my age. He wasn't quite 59. And I said, he does drink heavily. He said, oh, we knew that. We could tell that right away. So that's one thing we knew. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't ask, was it something due to like his liver size, or did you test him, or blood work, or any of that sort of stuff? They just knew he was a heavy drinker, and that he had head trauma, and he was in his late 50s. And I know that head trauma patients can be violent. unexpectedly. So I said, he's already an angry man. I said, he has just last week, he assaulted me. I said, so please be careful around him in case he acts out. And so they were like, oh, okay, that's good to know. They said, all right, well, he's stabilized now. We're going to transfer him to ICU. The ICU nurse will call. There's nothing more you can do here. And we limit who can be up here. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a shock trauma unit, but it's like being in the midst of air traffic control. There are all these people, and they are tending to life and death emergencies. Just go, go, go on, and there are computers everywhere, and there are 30 people, here, and there are 30 people here, and yet the space is very limited and small. And my husband was in a back brace or neck brace. He was on a ventilator. He was unconscious. He had some lacerations on his face. Um, and so after I kind of updated him on some of his medical history, they took me back downstairs where I met up with my daughter, and we proceeded to come home. And then sometime around 1 a.m., I got a phone call from ICU charge nurse. And she needed to go over some things that if he didn't make it through the night, they needed some permissions from me to try and save his life. And I was like, okay, I get that. And so I went through all the permissions. I'm like, yes, please do whatever you can to save him. Um, and, I did remind them, he has a history of violence. Please be careful near him. And the ICU charge nurse said, ma'am, I know you don't know me from anything. We don't have a relationship. She said, but I am going to tell you right now, run, get all your stuff, pack up all your things. You and your daughters, get out. Do not leave any signs of where you're going. Don't leave a trail. Just get out. And she said, we will take good care of him. We will do our very best to save his life, but this is the time for you to run. And after 36 years together, I could not leave him. I had always been there beside him. I always took care of him. He had had some major medical issues that I walked through. At one point, he had had surgery to repair some previous surgery places on his side, and they herniated. They had herniated, and they tried to do repair work, and they ended up not being able to keep a sterile field. So my husband had a wound that was 10 inches by 5 inches by 4 inches deep in his side. And twice a day, I could stick my whole hand inside of his wound, and I would debride it of all dead matter and then repack it. I made the medication to keep that a sterile environment. And we lived that way for 6 months. I took care of his wound twice a day. Um, I was not in a place to leave him now where I didn't know if he was going to survive this accident. So I stayed. And I stayed by his bedside every day for 4 weeks, for 8 to 10 hours a day. Um, at one point, he was really struggling with agitation. They had to put mittens on him and keep him tied to his bed because he would pull out all his tubes. He would try to leave the bed. He wasn't aware of what he was doing. He was having localized purposeful movement. And but in the evening he would get really agitated. All the stimulation from the day would well up and he would act out. And it got to a point where one night there was me and 6 nurses and 2 security guards that were called to try to keep my husband in bed. And he was fighting all of us. And I'll never forget, he reached over to my arm and he grabbed it and he purposefully tried to break my arm. He was trying to snap my arm in half while he just, again, this close to my face, eyes locked, and he was just breaking my arm. And I protected him from anybody seeing that. I did not let anyone know what he was trying to do to me because I was more concerned about keeping him calm in his hospital bed so we could get him moved to TBI rehab where he would be able to continue his health care so that he could have a productive life. Um, and all this time while he's in the hospital and I'm by his bedside, um, I had contacted his family the morning after his admission. And I said, he's been admitted to shock trauma. He has a brain injury. He's on a ventilator. They're keeping him stable. I said, I don't think right now that anyone other than me is allowed to visit him. I said, but I will keep you guys posted. By this point, we all had a very strained relationship. My daughters and I had decided we were not going to participate in his family gatherings anymore. They were very controlling, very manipulative. Um, and so we had tapped out on that. And so I talked to his niece and I said, could you be my point person where I contact you, give you updates, and you update the rest of the family? And they were like, yes. She says, but his mom, we're not going to let his mom come into the hospital because at this point she was in her late 80s, possibly 90, and she had just had a heart procedure done. And COVID was still very much alive and well. And I said, no, I totally understand that. We'll make sure that, she'll get her own personal updates. And so as I would, notify the niece, I would also, first thing I would do at the hospital is I would contact um, my niece or his niece, update her. Then I would call my daughter, Sierra, my oldest, and I would update her on her dad. And then she would call my mom, who would then call his mom so that from mom to mom, they could connect. And we did that twice a day. At no point was I ever informed that um, the sister was showing up at the hospital every morning with the mom before I could get there. I have IBS in the morning, so I have a lot of stomach issues. And so every day behind my back, never mentioning to my mom or anyone, they were bringing the mom that they weren't allowing in the hospital to the hospital to spend time with her son. And the fact that I was being lied to, I wasn't having it. His medical team had explained to me the level of his brain injury and what he was able to withstand, and they asked that I limit visitors. They weren't limiting visitors, but they asked me to as his wife, limit his visitors. And instead, they were going around behind my back and visiting him. So he had multiple people in his hospital room without my knowledge or consent. And then, of course, at night, we had gotten to the point of having to call security to hold him down. And it was getting bad. So I put a restriction on visiting hours. No more visitors unless I was present and I approved them. And that started a big thing. His older brother lives 3 hours away. And so he wanted to come and see him. And so he and his wife would travel up to the hospital and was like, please let us see him. And I was like, I will. I'll let you see him because his best friend was his brother. After, just about breaking his nose as a child, they had grown very, very close. I said, yeah, I will let you do that as long as he's capable. If he's in an aggressive state or an agitated state, we can't do it. So they would drive the hours there, and I would go down and I would have to meet them in the lobby and then walk them up to the trauma ICU floor. And we did that and did that. And by this point, I'm still bleeding. My surgery was trying to be planned. And I was like, okay, it's an outpatient procedure. One day, I'll just won't be here for one day. And so I got scheduled for March 15th for surgery. And on March 13th, my husband had a new nurse that night. And she was explaining to me that his agitation was getting so bad that they were instructed at that point to call the psych unit, that he would possibly be transported to the psych unit for the increased security measures. And that if that were to happen, it would delay his release to brain rehab center. And so I was very concerned. And I was like, hey, I said, And at that point, he was really very fitful in bed. And that nurse was the first time ever anyone asked me to step out of the room. Usually, when I was present, he was at his very, very best. If I was there, they would let me untie his restraints and he could sit calmly with me and I would take care of him and I could feed him and all that sort of stuff. Um, and everyone, every time I came in, they're like, "Oh my gosh, there she is. He's been looking for you and forward to you, and all he does is talk about you." And there's kind of a standard procedure that they do with brain injury patients where they cover the same questions over and over and over again. And so there were times when he didn't know who he was or where he was or why he was there, um, but he knew everything about me. He would give my full name. He says, "This is my beautiful wife, the love of my life." And he would say, he would just give a whole history of me, even if he couldn't remember who he was or where he was. Um, and so at this point, I was like, what can I do? And so this nurse said, "You know what? If you could give us a couple of days with no visitors so that we could just work with him and maybe get him to a point where he is manageable, where he doesn't feel like he can get away with anything because you're here, um, maybe then we can get him to be approved for rehab." And so I was like, okay. And she was like, "I don't want to hurt your feelings." I said, this isn't about me, it's about him, getting him to heal. And so I said, "All right." I said, "Well, I actually have surgery on Tuesday. So I just won't come tomorrow. And then I'll be back after my surgery." And his family had been wanting me to lift the restrictions so that they could come in while I was in surgery and sit with him. And I bought it. I was like, "Yeah, if you can sit with him, I mean, he would love to have you here." What I did not know that was a few weeks after my older daughter and I had a head on collision with a tractor trailer at 60 miles an hour, my husband, with his family, sat in a legal office and signed a medical directive that they kept from us, giving all medical authority to his family. They all signed the papers, it was all legal. And never since from 2016 to 2022 did they ever mention that those papers existed. And this whole time that I was in at his bedside every day, they knew they had the papers. They didn't present the papers for whatever reason. Maybe if he was going to die, they wanted him to die on my watch so they could blame me. Um, but nevertheless, I came in the day after surgery. I didn't stay long. And then the next day or that evening, I was told by his sister that they would be showing up at the hospital the next morning expecting to see him. And I was like, "Hold on. He's he's still not there yet. I'm still trying to get him to rehab. If you guys all come and expect to see him, it could set him back. Uh-uh. This is not working." And so I didn't answer, I didn't respond. And then that Thursday, March 17th, I was greeted at the hospital by his whole family, sitting on the side as I approached the check-in area because it's very strict policy of checking in. Um, I heard my older brother-in-law, who I had welcomed and hugged, and all that sort of stuff, and all the visits to my husband's bedside. He says, "There she is." He pointed me out like a bunch of hyenas were sitting on the sideline and they had just put eyes on their prey. And so I just went straight to the security line. I checked in. The security personnel said, "His family has been here all morning. Um, and we know that you have restrictions and we understand where they've been in place and why." And there had already been a couple of conflicts downstairs and they were very supportive of me. And so they said, "We need you to go over there and ask them to leave." And I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go and talk to them. And so the security team said, "We'll go with you. All you need to do is say, 'He's doing fine today, but we're not having visitors. Thank you so much for coming.'" And I said, "Okay." So I went over and I said that. And my younger brother in law just responded, "Duly noted." And I didn't know what that meant, but I went upstairs. I spent the day with my husband. And then sometime around, I think it was like maybe 6 or 7 o'clock that night, I had two charge nurses and a social security personnel or social worker come in and say they'd like to speak with me. I had just caught some conversation that they're still here downstairs. And the nurse is saying things like, well, as long as they don't come up here. And I just knew that had something to do with me and them. And so we went into a conference room and they presented to me that his family did have a medical directive, that they were taking over the case, that they had spent all day in legal debates about it. And I was being removed from care and I was not to be granted any visitation permissions. Um, all the hospital staff said that I made all the best choices for his care, that they had never seen somebody so committed and devoted to their spouse, and how much that he loved having me there. They couldn't understand why I was being asked to leave and not come back. Um, and so they said, we're going to go talk to the family and see if they would please consent to you having visitation. And so I was blindsided. I had not known about any of this. My oldest daughter was working. So I called my younger daughter and I said, this is what's happening. I said, and I am here in this conference room in a hospital setting, and I don't know where I can go and what I can do. And I'm so alone. And so after an hour or so in that room talking to her, I kept her on the phone. She and I stayed on the phone for hours until I made it home. And so I said, I'm going to see if I can go stand at the nurse's station just so I'm not alone. And I asked, the nurses at the station, they're like, oh, absolutely. And they were just so kind and sweet. We developed a really strong connection. And they're like, we're so sorry. We don't understand why they kept these documents from you, why they didn't present them so much sooner. And I said, I don't know. And the longer I was there, and I could hear voices out in the hallway, um, I just I just had to get out of there. It was too much. I was shaking, I was crying. I just needed to be in a safe place where I didn't feel like I was at risk of being hurt. Um, so I asked the nurses if I could say goodbye to my husband, and they were like, absolutely. And so I went in and I explained to him, I said, I said, you had some papers that you signed with your family, and they're here and they want me to leave. And I don't think they're going to let me come back. And he was still very semi conscious. He wasn't awake and alert very much at all. And he was grabbing my arm and he was pulling me in and pulling me in and he was kissing me and he was trying to tell me what the situation was, because he knew what he did was he'd subverted my position as his wife to be mandated by his family. Um, and he was trying to talk to me about staying and not letting me go. And I said, I have to go. And so as I left, I had to walk past his family, um, talking to the nursing staff. And his older brother had his finger in one of the charge nurses' faces, and she was very pregnant. Um, she was due within like a month. And I felt so guilty. Sorry. I felt like I put her in harm's way because their anger was for me, wasn't for her. And I was so scared for her and what they were capable of doing to her. And I hoped that once I left, they would just let her alone. And once I got home, I just collapsed into tears. I've spent a good portion of the last few years in tears. Um, I was, of course, when I left, there was still no grant of visitation. And then I got a text message 2 nights, or the next night. and it was my sister-in-law, his oldest brother's wife, and she had said she convinced them to let me come and visit. So I just needed to let them know when I would like to do that. And I didn't know how to respond. It was like 11 o'clock at night. So I didn't respond that night. I responded in the morning and I said, um, our oldest daughter is working today, but they'd like to be able to accompany both the daughters would like to be able to accompany me. I'd like to be able to come tomorrow, which would or Sunday. And then I got a response back saying, no, his sister's going to be here Sunday and she doesn't want to see my face. So it was that day or never. So our oldest daughter could not come with me to the hospital. My younger daughter did come with me to the hospital. Um, my best friend works at Johns Hopkins University Hospital. And so she had advised me to ask for a social worker. And I did, but there were none available at that time. And so they had transferred me to the charge nurse where my husband was. And she said, well, let me see if his brother would just step out of the room so you can see your husband. And I said, oh, I don't think that's going to go over well. She goes, I'll just ask. And so she set the phone down and I could hear the screaming, the yelling. Um, no, no, I would only have monitored visitation and very limited visitation. Um, so then I came into the hospital. My sister-in-law came down and she escorted me as far as she could go. And she told me, she said, don't you ever call here again. She says, that almost started World War II right over your husband's bed. They were so mad that you had the nerve to call and ask for somebody to keep you safe. And so I got up to his hospital room and he was a mess. His brother had the TV on real loud. All the lights were on. I always tried to keep it quiet and dim there, peaceful. I usually put on some nature videos that would play soft music. Um, and as soon as I walked in, I saw because he has a beard and mustache. He had food in his mustache and beard. His eyes were crusted shut. Um, and the first thing his brother said to me was, he just crapped his pants. But don't say anything about changing him because he'll just get mad and fling it. And I was like, he has to be changed. He can't sit in his own fecal matter. I said his skin is already compromised and that would just make things worse. He could get infected. He's like, no, no, you don't do that. And I tried to let my husband know I was there and he he was very drugged. I'm sure that they had made sure he was sedated heavily before I got there. Um, and again, my brother-in-law was like, don't wake him up. And I said, no, I think he should know I'm here, that I've come to visit him. And I said, and by the way, I said, there are washcloths. You can wash his face. So he doesn't have to, be like this. And he goes, it's okay. The nurses give him a bath once a day. I said, but he's obviously in need of some cleaning. Um, we should do that. And then I did wake him up and he was very excited to see me. He gave me lots of kisses. Um, and then the nurse came in and she was giving him a heparin shot for blood flow. And his brother said, yeah, don't wake him up. And she said, no, no, that's protocol. We wake him up to let him know he's getting a shot. I'm not just going to give him an injection without him knowing it's coming. And I said, he's got a bowel movement. I said, I can help you change him if you like, but I've done that by myself. I just think he needs to be clean. She's like, absolutely. And then she noticed that his face was very dirty. So she helped get him clean. And then he passed right back out of sleep again. And my brother-in-law told me that was the end of my visit. And from that point on, I was not allowed in anymore. Of course, they make a claim that I could have come in if I just asked. But it wasn't an option. I was at that point being very bullied by his whole family, what I could and couldn't do, what I was expected to do. I was supposed to take some of his belongings, throw it in a trash bag, have one of his bosses come by who had known gun violence against his wife, come by and pick the stuff up. And Yeah. So from that point on, it was all a total different narrative. They told me things like I barely came to visit him, all that. And so they haven't allowed us to have conversation. Um, we had to sell our home. So we basically lost all of our belongings. We had very, very little money. But just before finding out about all the paperwork, and because I was having surgery, I did give each of my girls electronically like $1,500 just as an emergency money situation. Once they took over care of my husband, um, I did speak to an attorney, about our situation and trying to find out what kind of rights I had, if I could claim any kind of marital rights to see my husband. Um, and a lot of times things can be legal and it doesn't mean they'll be upheld. Likewise, things can be illegal and it doesn't mean people won't do them and get away with it. So, as much as you think you have the law on your side, you don't. It's not worth the effort on their part to enforce what's lawful or what's unlawful. Um, and so I took out a little bit more money overall, like $20,000. It was about everything we had. We we weren't rich people. Um, and then a week later, he was discharged to TBI rehab. Um, and as part of the protocol, he was an anti-vaxxer, so he did not want to get the COVID vaccine. However, he couldn't be admitted to TBI rehab without the vaccine, which put me in the position of deciding for him, should he get the vaccine so he can get TBI rehab and regain parts of his brain and function so that he can live a full life, or refuse him the vaccine because he wouldn't want it, um, and therefore not letting him get full healing. Either way, I was doomed. I was either going to get him vaccinated against his will or withhold full recovery from him by refusing the vaccine. And knowing that we had gotten the vaccine and we were fine, and I wanted him to have a full life, I wanted him to have rehab, I opted for him to have vaccine. And so after about a week of him being in rehab, it was time for his second shot. And at that point, it was refused. He was terminated from on location rehab care. His family took him immediately from the rehab facility that day to an attorney's office where they had him sign legal papers for power of attorney for them, which isn't legal. You can't have somebody with a brain injury sign legal documents for them to be legal. But again, things happen whether they're legal or not legal. It doesn't matter. And so they emptied out our bank account and left me $1. And I had my mom had just gotten a pacemaker in January, and so I was taking her and my dad to a checkup at their cardiologist an hour from here. And my oldest daughter, came with me. My younger daughter had just the night before finished work on a project that she had been working on, so she was at home alone sleeping when his family showed up at our front door, banging ferociously. And we got an immediate call from my younger daughter saying, "Hey, you know, uncle and aunt are here banging on the door. What should we do?" I was like, "Call 911. Just call 911, stay inside, what have you." Um, but by that point, by the time she called 911, his brother saw a cracked open window in our garage. So he came through the garage and then came down to that laundry room garage door and kicked it in. Um, there was so much rage in my brother in law. This was a very, very sturdy door. Our neighbor across the street is a master carpenter, and he came over to help me repair that area after this break in. And he says, "I've never seen a door that heavy." He says, "Also, I've never seen somebody so angry that they bent the bolt system. So that heavy steel bolt was bent. The door didn't give way. Usually something there breaks in the threshold of the door. That didn't happen. And so they came in, they met my daughter in the hallway. She'd just woken up. They started making demands. My brother-in-law tried to push my daughter down the stairs. His wife tried to push her out the front door. There was a lot of struggle inside the house. We had elderly neighbors, and they came over to try and help before the police could get there. Um, just so happened my best friend was not at the hospital that day. She was nearby when I wasn't. So she was able to come straight away and be with my daughter. Um, but yeah, it was a horrible encounter. And in that encounter, my husband was there. Um, that's how we knew he was not in rehab anymore. And so he had his boss, one of his coworkers, his brother, his brother's wife, his sister. They were all there. They ransacked our home. They tormented my younger daughter. They assaulted her. Police tried to keep her protected as much as possible. Um, and now, 1 year after that, well, actually, kind of immediately following, my younger daughter had started having these episodes where she would pass out. And we thought, okay, the stress is getting to her. But then a year later, we discovered that what was happening was she's having PTSD seizures. And so, in a period of 24 hours, she had multiple, multiple seizures. She went by ambulance a few times to the hospital. Um, they eventually kept her. She's had every test run for epilepsy, tumors, anything physical that could contribute to these seizures. And there is nothing. It is all PTSD related from the trauma that she experienced at the hands of her family, her father's family. Um, she has it's devastated her life. She is on the verge of losing her job because she has so many seizures. She'll have seizures at work. Luckily, she has EMT trained coworkers, but it has devastated her life to have these seizures. And him and his family know about it. I had reached out um, in one of the ambulance calls to see if there was anything I was missing in his father's brain tumor history that included seizures. The response I got back was, "You were married long enough. You should know all his medical history." And I was like, "Thanks. My daughter's in an ambulance. Her brain is scrambling right now, and you're just going to be so callous." Um, so, so that was the turning point for us. I know that was a very long response to your question. Um, but yeah, it was the true betrayal trauma of working together as a family to cut us out of his life should anything happen. And then to that point, in fact, that in an alcoholic state, he was abusive and then um, careless with the ATV while drinking alcohol, which led to the injury. Um, and through it all, something remains very poignant to me was that in the mix of all this, just a few weeks before that last physical assault, I prayed so hard for God to reach my husband. And I just remember it like I'm sitting there right now. I sat there and I said, God, whatever it takes to reach him, do it. I need you to reach his heart and reach his soul for Christ. He was a proclaiming Christian, but there was no evidence of that. There was never any story of testimony to his salvation, nothing. And he was just so mean and cruel to me and to our daughters. And I remember specifically saying, God would, no matter how it hurts me, reach him. And so even though it was hugely traumatic, and throughout that 4 weeks that I was by his side every day, um, I had these moments of hope where the hospital staff knew about his abuse and his alcohol and all that. And they were like, we can help you. We have programs. In the moments when he was lucid, he was like, yeah, he says, we're going to get help this time. This time we're going to do it. And, for the first time in about 12 years of doing that gray rocking, I allowed myself to feel my love for him and to feel the hope that we could build something for our future, only to have it absolutely destroyed by his family. So it's difficult. Like we say, every story is different for victims. Um, and yes, there is a definite God rescued me. He answered my prayer and he said, I'm getting you out. I'm not going to build this relationship any further. I'm getting you out and getting you to safety. And we are now living in a place where my husband and his family do not know where we live. We will be changing our last name as soon as I'm sure that all the legal paperwork has been completed. So they won't know who we are, where we are, nothing. No more tracking us down, finding us, breaking in. Um, we've lived that and we're done with it. And we're going to have a free life. But yeah, every story is different. So you can endure a lot. I guess my plea would be it's so much more important to find your exit, your safe exit sooner rather than later. Um, you'll always be thinking, oh, I want it was on my mind when things started getting really bad between my husband and I. Our youngest daughter was 15. I did not want her to have to spend time with him at his place without the companionship of her sister or me, because my girls are 6 years apart. So at 15, my oldest was 21. And so there wouldn't have been this overlap of both girls go with their dad. Um, there's always the next goal, of if we can make it through till this time, then maybe I'll leave. Or you go through those periods where things are going pretty well. Status quo is okay, it's livable. And like a frog in hot water, you don't realize how bad it is because you're just soaked in it. You are soaked in it so much, you don't realize what's eroding. Um, so I really want to stress to people that leave for your safety sooner rather than later, because there will always be something to hold you there. Whether it's doubt as to whether or not is this abuse, yes, it's abuse. Um, is it your fault? No, absolutely not. You are not responsible for someone else's choices. And just, yeah, get out, get safe. Um, One thing that I did, and I definitely encourage people to do, and it will depend on their safety levels as well, is keep a record of what happens and when. Um, I have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of incidences of anger, outright abuse, control and manipulation. Um, my daughters had made videos of, hey, if we disappear, check with my dad, because it's him. We kept bags in our trunks of bug out bags so that if we ever needed to not come home or run for our cars, at least we had some basics like our medications, clean clothes, change of clothes for a couple of days, that sort of thing. I had women in my lives to whom I knew he didn't know where they lived or how to contact them, that I could go to them. And yet I still didn't access and use those because maybe it's getting better. Maybe there's still hope. Maybe I'll stay for this long. Maybe this, maybe that, maybe whatever. No more maybes. Get out. get help. If you have someone like a truly trusted friend, who I did, my best friend, I could trust her with everything in my life and soul, my babies, all that. I kept a safe at her house. I kept some of those documents in there that I had kept logs of, a small stack of money, a little bit of cash for an emergency fund. Um, Whatever you can to get into somebody else's hands so that, they're a safe record. Um, and in the end, if you lose everything, if you are, I mean, we are lucky. We're in a townhome right now, but we were 2 weeks from homeless when we found this townhome. I signed the lease before I saw this place. Um, it's very hard to find any kind of compassionate housing. Assistance programs, especially in this political climate, are very much in jeopardy right now. So if you don't have a penny or a scrap or a piece of clothing to your name or anything, it doesn't matter. Get to safety. I at this point, I have had, I just recently lost food stamps thanks to the political environment. Um, they say I can reapply, but it was too touch and go in the past 2 weeks with the administration change. Um, I don't care if I have to eat out of a trash can. My girls and I are not subject to that anymore. And it's just so important for me to encourage women to get to safety. I wish I had listened to that ICU charge nurse. Um, because in the end, just because I loved him enough to have stayed through all of that, he didn't love me. He wasn't capable of it. He could scream it from the rooftops through snot and slobber, through anger and rage. He didn't know how to love me. He only loved himself. And he was only looking out for his own self self perpetuation, self glorification, whatever it is. Um, their their idea, and you can't learn it for them. Their idea of love is control. And because of that, they can't see past it. And you can't convince them to see past it. So, yeah, just do what you can to get safe. Do what you can to keep a trail should it need to go to court. I was fortunate that at the time of our divorce, Maryland became a 50-50 state. Um, but his boss, the one who had known gun violence against his wife, she is one of my dearest friends. And a lot of what was done to her, her ex husband convinced my husband, who was his employee, to do the same thing to me. So I had a double team of um, vengeful, abusive men working out their plots and plans. But when she went through it, Maryland was not a 50-50 state. So they had to go through court systems. Had to go through hearings and testimonies and all that. And she got 35% of his gross, but she's safe. She's safe. So you just have to be prepared that you have evidence should you need it, if you can get it. If it puts you in too much risk, just get out, you know? So that's just my 2 cents is get to safety and then do the rest. Hopefully communities like what you're building here, where we talk about what we've been through, because we are now able to speak with our voices, with our personhood, we can show up for other women who don't feel the safety or the ability to speak up for themselves. We can show up for them. I have no problem going to a courthouse for a stranger I've never met to stand there and hold her hand and say, we're going to get through this. And we're going to make sure that you have food and you have clothes and you have a roof over your head. And we're going to get you to a place where you can thrive, not just survive. That's what we're here for. That's why we lend our voices. That's why, I heal loudly so others don't die in silence. And that's what I bring to the table.
And that's a lot.
Yeah.
Michele, oh my goodness. That was an exceptional conversation. Thank you for letting us in your world. And I just want to leave everybody with something she just said is that you can't, their version of love is control, and control isn't love. And the most important thing to know is that your safety is more important than the idea of what you want the relationship to be, because that's not the reality of it.
Yeah.
But Michele,
I'm sorry. I know that was a much longer
wow,
interview than you needed. Please cut
deserves.
and edit as you need to. You don't need every detail. I think I just instill in that point of my survival where it just all still comes out.
Yeah, and it's needed. It's needed. I could tell that you needed to have this conversation. It was
Yeah.
more, it wasn't just about who is going to help, but it was also about what you needed to. And it's a privilege that I'm able to have this space for you to have this conversation with us. And it's our privilege to be
Grateful.
able to step into your world and your light. And we thank you so, so very much
Thank
for
you.
being here with us.
I am honored and sincerely grateful. Thank you for seeing me, for hearing me, um, for validating my humanity, my personhood, and my individual value. Um, I'm very grateful.
It's our privilege, girl. Y'all, this has been another amazing episode of the Confidence Way podcast. I just want to leave y'all with this. Keep showing up, keep sharing love, and keep shining your light. And you know what it is. We gon'
Love you.
love you too, girl.